Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible, verse by verse, a plain and simple study. The whole Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Genesis chapter 2. We are in verse 7, and we're talking about what did God create? Let's read this verse again, and then verse 7 again. Then the Lord God formed the man out of the dust from the ground and breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and the man became a living being. So I'm asking the question, we're dealing with this issue here. What did God create? What did God create? We're talking about the soul of man, and I'm taking a little time out to just kind of share with that. Last time we talked about the spirit, that God created the spirit, and of course when it says that he breathed into man's nostrils, let's look at it again. He said, then he breathed into his nostrils. He breathed the breath of life into his nostrils, and man became a living breath. He's referring to a spirit here, and not so much as air, okay? In other words, the air, because notice it said God breathed. Think about it when a baby is born and we slap and the air comes in and the baby starts to cry and all of that. That is the process of life from a physical perspective, right? So God did not need to do that when he created Adam's body, right? He didn't have to breathe air, but it was the breath of life. So we're talking about man is a three-part being. He is a spirit, he has a soul, and he lives in the body. So last time we talked about the spirit, that the spirit is the life of the body. The spirit is also the real you. In other words, if you were separated from your body, what would we see, right? And presumably you would see somebody look like me. In other words, if I died right now, what would you see? You would see somebody. You would see a spirit being that looked like me. I'm assuming better, younger, okay, with hair. I'm kidding, but um, but more vibrant in life, obviously. Okay, vibrant with life. Give you some examples of people that we saw with, who spirit, right? They're kind of walking around as spirit beings, right? Elijah, Moses, Samuel. We saw that we saw them separated from their bodies, and thus, um, if you was to go to heaven right now, again, if I died and I went to heaven, the friends and loved ones, what would I see? I would see their spirits just like they would see my spirits. And one other thing about the spirit is that the spirit, through your spirit, you would contact the realm of the spirit, the realm of God, and that's going to be important when we get over into chapter 3, because what happened when Adam died? Okay, now also understand about the spirit, because we said it is the life. So from this particular, again, we're looking at angles, right? So as we're looking at it from Adam's angle, okay, the spirit had the life of God in it, God's presence, right? So Adam's spirit was alive, and what makes alive? What is life? Well, God. That's plain and simple. God makes it alive. Okay? So Adam's spirit was life because it gave life to his body, because God was life. You also, through the spirit, can see, which kind of, you can say, light, to the spiritual realm. It is conceivable that God was able to communicate with God through his spirit. Okay? And again, so that's important to understand that what is spiritual death, just file that for now. Now, last time I also said that man is a soul. Now, what is the soul? The soul is the emotions, the desires, okay, the intellect and the will. You could say that the soul, it makes you uniquely you. Okay, your personality. All right. So your spirit and soul are inseparable. You can be separated from your body, which we see. Your spirit, however, and soul are inseparable. But your spirit is the life, but your soul, we can say, is immaterial, but it is also that part that is your intellect. All right, it is your intellect. It is your or mind. We could say your mind, which would be different than your brain. Then you could say, but it's your emotions and your desires, and your will, which is very important. What is interesting is how God makes this work with the body. So I just mentioned your brain, the mechanism of your brain, right? It's a very fascinating mechanism, right? Where the mind works through that as well. Okay, which is interesting because man, at death, like I said, what happens at death? Your spirit and soul is separated. Man cannot plug into your mind. In other words, your brain. Your body is just a vessel. I'll get into that more later. But your body is just a vessel. What is interesting is that your spirit and soul, especially your emotions, your emotions, your will, your intellect, your soul, right? How they fit into the sensory of your body. So when I'm talking about my memory, right? And again, don't know how all that gels. That's the mystery there from our perspective. But your emotions and mind and will, like I say, they form you. They perform your personality, how you process things. And it's important to understand that, again, as we are looking from the perspective of Genesis. So now keep this in mind, that God is present on the earth. He formed man from the dust of the earth. He breathed the breath of life into man. Once we get past chapter 3, you don't see God's presence in the earth. And that's extremely important, because this is why we see darkness. Okay, we see darkness. So how man communicates, what man is able to process. See, how man is able to process that. How so like now I'm looking through my eyes, the physical. Adam was able to process through both his spirit, which is and he's able to communicate and fellowship with God. At the same time, he was, of course, plugged into the physical, but all of that dumped into his soul, right? And thus he enjoys the pleasures of life, the sweet fellowship with God, as well as life, the life-giving. Okay, so it is interesting to note the will, which is the part of your soulish area. How is your will conquered? Salesmen do it all the time, don't they? Right? Well, salesmen use your emotions, your desires, your intellect to sway the will. If you can control the soul, you can control the will of man. Now keep that in mind, because when we talk about how did Eve succumb to sin? Well, because Satan enticed her. Remember I said that already at this time, sin has already contaminated God's universe, as witnessed by the presence of darkness, which we see in the coming new heavens and new earth. There's no darkness. The darkness represents the presence of sin and its contamination. And we're getting into this more because we see this how Satan, and he doesn't change his tactics, how was he able to persuade Eve, Adam and Eve? So again, he used their emotions, their desires, right? The desire for the tree. Their mind, he was able to, right, plant thoughts in their minds. And when he had those three, they willed to sin. Now, just as much as they will to sin, you also can will to do right. By what? Programming your emotions, your desires, and your minds to do God's will. You see, so the purity, of course, of Genesis 2, we haven't had that yet. So basically, we're going to see that they enjoy all that this world had to offer. We cannot imagine the bliss of that. We just can't. You also had God's life pulsating through them. God's presence within the earth. We can't fathom that. We look at it from the death side of it, Adam sinned. So when Adam sinned, his spirit died. The life in his spirit, the spiritual life, the presence of God, which is life, he was alienated, he was cut off. What that also meant was that he was living in darkness because he was alienated from God's life. He was cut off from God's life. Adam at this point is receiving life. All right, let's talk about the body. The body, okay, I'm going to go back to the soul for a moment. Let's go back to the soul, okay. The soul, okay, as God designed it, is your emotions with the right desires, your will submitted to God's plan, your thoughts pure, okay. If right now as we become believers, and this is why we could answer the question. We can answer the question, why do Christians sin? Christians sin because their mind, emotions, and desires sway their will. Think about it. Why do I buy that car? Why do I eat that ice cream? We can go on and on and on. And the reason why is because your mind. Right now, if I think about chocolate chip, dark chocolate covered chocolate chip, chunky chips. Now, guess what? That's in my mind. My mind is stirring my desires and emotions. You know, it's also arousing my taste buds. Right? If I was a slave to that, I'd run right out of here. Wouldn't even bother to turn off this all off. Run right out of there and chomp down on it. But that's what we do. In every aspect of our life, whether it's addiction, whether it's whatever, laziness, we can go on and on. When you came to Christ, and what is kind of deceiving, or I shouldn't say deceiving, that's kind of the wrong word there, but what has happened when you come to Christ, sometimes we experience the um, the trauma of salvation, the joy of our salvation, and we forget our minds are still the same in our soulish realm. Our minds, our emotions, our desires is the same. Our spirits, remember, were dead. We were cut off from God, right? But it's alive. That's what is being born again is about. My new spirit. I'm born again. New life. I have new life. My body hasn't changed. We're going to get to that later. My body hasn't changed. But my body is just an instrument. I'm going to get to it, but my body is just an instrument. What has to change in order for me to walk in spiritual victory is I have to change the way I think. Why? Because those are the thoughts that are programmed in my mind. Why? Pornography, lust, alcohol, drugs. And what is interesting, what is an inclination for some is not an inclination for others. I don't have a problem with alcohol. I don't have a problem with drugs. I never did them, so I don't have a problem with them. Lust? Oh yeah, stay away from lust. I have to make a decision to stay away from lust. That's my downfall. Alcohol? I could bathe in the tub of whatever your favorite alcohol is. Wouldn't bother me. Now, on the other hand, there are people that have no problem with lust. Okay, but just the smell of alcohol. Why? Because what happens when I smell alcohol? What happens when whatever addiction any of us have? What happens? It arouses my emotions. It arouses my desire because my mind is like, yeah, I want the sweet taste of that. I want the good feeling of that. I want the high. I want yada yada yada. Or how about just being plain lazy? I don't want to get up. Yeah, it feels good not getting up. So what has to happen when I come to Christ? I have to change the way I think. If I change the way I think, I can change and control my emotions. I can change and control my desires, and I can always control my will. That's the soul of man. See, that's the soul of man. It's immaterial in that respect. Your spirit is a spiritual being. Your flesh is a fleshly being. But my soul is a immaterial part. However powerful, because it controls. It's like a little rudder. Controls your entire being. All right. Next time we talk about the body, and I'm going to talk again. I'm talking about all of the relationships at this point with this. All right, guys. We'll talk about the body in our next study. I'll see you next time. All right.